My name's David Holmes, music producer, music supervisor for Ocean's 13 here at Ocean Way Recording, Hollywood, California. When you walk into this room and you know about all the amazing things that happened here, Ray Charles did I Can't Stop Loving You with a 30-piece orchestra. Sinatra did everything in here from 60 onwards with all his crew. You had Sarah Vaughan, Count Basie, Miles Davis, Quincy Jones, they all graced this room at one time or other. So you can just imagine the good times and, just the history of this room. I mean, you can almost feel it in a way. It's kind of strange and it's almost intimidating. So it was a real dream of mine to record here. And as you can see, the room really hasn't been touched, which is rare these days. And I think that's where a lot of studios kind of, they mess up. I mean, why fix something that's not broken? And it's acoustically perfect in here. And when you actually do record in this room and you hear it coming out of the speakers in the control room, you're guaranteed that that's what you'll hear in your car or your home stereo. It's quite incredible. I didn't even think there was going to be Ocean's 12. I just thought 11, that was it. It's not like James Bond where this thing's going to just keep on running and running forever. And I think each movie has had a very, very individual feel, and that's been done very, very purposely. It's been amazing to do that, but it's also been quite tricky because the music all comes from a certain kind of ballpark. And myself, as a music producer, I never want to repeat myself. And I think it's a big part of the challenge to actually do something completely different every time. But what makes it difficult is to do something completely different, but still remain in that ballpark. Ocean's 11 was, I suppose, just, really fun. We were in Vegas and it had so many things going for it. And still we were trying not to be very obvious. So I was just constantly trying to think of ways that there was a connection to Vegas, but it wasn't like the Rat Pack. We didn't want to emulate the original Ocean's 11. So I started thinking of other elements, and I had this Elvis track, A Little Less Conversation, which to me just said everything about that film. Lyrically, it completely summed it up. Secondly, you had this connection with Elvis and Vegas. And thirdly, it sounded just really current. And last but not least, it was a track that was not very obvious and people didn't know that track. I mean, all my friends knew it, but I'm talking about on a huge scale, for considering how famous Elvis was, people were like, most people had never heard it before. So that made it really fresh and interesting at the same time. So that's the way. We're constantly trying to think of ways of adapting to the film, but doing it in a very kind of unobvious way. And from that track, that started to sort of spawn all these other ideas. And that in itself, I think, creates, this continuity. It just gives you that link that makes everything work. But in 12, it was very different because the whole scenario was in Europe. So then it was very obvious to me to start drawing from a lot of other European influences, like people like Morricone and Guy Pedersen and Bruno Nicolai and Serge Gainsbourg and stuff. They became a lot of the main influences. So a lot of the music that I was sending Stephen was very, very European. Now 13, that's when it got really tricky because we were back in Vegas and we had to avoid all the cliches of Vegas, but still create this, truly original piece. The process of working with Stephen on, the Ocean's films starts with a script. And, after I read the script, loose ideas just start to form. And from them, I started gathering, going through my record collection and burning, from vinyl onto CD and just anything that connects with what I've just read and what I've felt. And obviously with Oceans, it's not too difficult to kind of picture the actors because, I think everybody probably feels that they all have a relationship with each and every one of these actors. It's almost like they're friends because they're so well known. So it's not really hard to sort of conjure up, each scenario and a feeling for what music might be needed. So I start sending him music, just frantically just sending him, like, you know, I've sent him like hundreds and hundreds of tracks over the years. And from those tracks, he's responsive to some and some he's not so responsive to. But that's part of the process. And sometimes you just gotta throw things in. Some will stick and some won't. But the tracks that do stick, whether it's a song or a piece of temp music, they start to form the whole style and feel of the film. And as you get deeper and deeper into the process, you start to get more feedback from Stephen. The more feedback you get, the more ideas you get, because you're starting to get like a grasp on the direction it's going in. A lot of the early kind of pre-production is experimental. I'm much more interested in trying to get music in there that people just don't know or haven't heard. Ocean's 11 was, I suppose, the classic case of, finding a song that was perfect for the film, that no one knew, but yet they were still familiar with. And it spoke to the film lyrically, emotionally, and, stylistically. By the time it gets to me actually going into the recording studio, I pretty much have an idea of how the whole thing's going to swing. And basically, the way I normally work is a lot of the temp music that Stephen uses, I use that a lot for inspiration, but not in terms of, I don't go in and say, rip off a piece of temp music. It's not like that. It's more, I look at all the instrumentation and the feel of it and what it's doing. And from that, I choose which musicians that I think are necessary for the job. Automatically, you've got a tempo, you've got the pace, and you've got the feel. And it's just a matter of, for me then, to go in and use my imagination to make it sound like a cohesive score for the film. In terms of crafting a scene with the music, it works in many different ways. I mean, sometimes Stephen cuts to the actual, especially with source music, and sometimes the score, sometimes he actually just cuts to the actual music. But most of the time, we are given a scene that needs music, and we got to make it work perfectly. Now, it's amazing sometimes when you actually put a piece of music up against a picture, how well it actually works. And I think in the case of Oceans, it's been very, very beneficial for us, because I think Stephen Marioni and Soderbergh have a lot of rhythm in their editing, so it makes it so much easier for us to actually place a piece of music and for things just to happen at the right time. Now, sometimes it takes a lot more sort of jiggery-pokery and a lot more sort of craft than actually just putting in a piece of music and crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. You've got this sort of blank canvas, and you start off by putting in your rhythm track, to get the whole feel and the pace and the energy. And from that, I think as you start putting in your instruments, certain sort of cuts that sort of happen within the editing basically sort of tell you that something else has to happen, another sound, or like a change of key, or like a chord change, or another instrument. So it's very much like there's no real kind of rules on how you sort of put a piece of music to a picture. It's kind of, you feel your way through it, and sometimes it takes a lot of pondering, and sometimes you can put a piece of music up against a picture and it just works perfectly. And you don't actually have to do that much, rather than just, move a couple of sounds or just add another instrument. The dialogue plays a big part in terms of, punctuation. That's something that I think you should never really get in the way of, because, when it comes to the sort of the mix, all the director's going to do is duck it anyway. So it's nice, we're constantly always sort of playing around the dialogue and just watching what happens. A lot of cutting and punctuation is very kind of logical, It tells you when things are going to change. I mean, it's actually a really interesting way of arranging music. And sometimes you can arrange a piece of music to a visual and you can remove the visual and you've just got this really unique arrangement that you could never have done without the picture. Because when you're making music normally, you're thinking about the structure in a very, very different way. Where when you're working to picture, you're working to actually what's going on in front of you. Every scene is completely different and every scene requires a very different kind of approach. I first got involved with Stephen doing Out of Sight. And, you know, we had a great time doing it and stuff. And when Out of Sight was done and dusted and stuff, I hadn't heard from him in a while. And I actually come home one night drunk, staying in a friend's house. I was staying on her couch, and I sat down on her couch. I was like pissed, and I shed a newspaper, and I lifted the newspaper, and I was flicking through it, and there was this little tiny caption that said Steven Soderbergh to direct Ocean's 11, and I just rang him. There and then, and he actually said that he was going to ask me anyway to do it. So I actually rang and says, I'd really like to do this, and he gave me the job. The first thing that he told me was he didn't want anything to do with the original Ocean's 11. I shouldn't even watch it. You know, it's going to be a very different thing, and that really excited me because it made me actually realize that I could do it. I'm not competing against Nelson Riddle. He's an amazing guy to work for in many ways. He treats you with total respect and treats you like an artist and treats you the way he likes to be treated himself. He's just really casual and very down to earth and creates this brilliant environment for you to come and work. And because it's Stephen, you actually don't have to work with anyone else. You don't have, you know, to work with any outsiders or no one else gets involved. It's a very personal relationship. He puts trust in you, and that trust, I think, gives you confidence. And I think a lot of the time working on movies this big is you need confidence, and you need that trust for the director to help you actually believe in yourself, because ultimately it's not my film. That's one of the first things I think you recognize when you get into making music for films. You gotta recognize that right away, that it's not your film, and the whole thing is a complete collaboration. But Stephen really makes it feel like a collaboration. You know, he's not in going, this is my movie and everything. He lets you express yourself and be experimental, and he likes to try new things, and that in itself is just, I think a lot of directors could take influence from that. When we first did the first batch of music for Oceans, you know, I didn't know what to expect. I was like, wow, I can't believe we're getting away with this. But when you work with Stephen, you realize that he wants to experiment, he wants to try new things. That's, in a way, what excites him and makes him the director that he is. Even in these movies, as big and commercial and accessible as they are, he's still doing loads of stuff that people just wouldn't dream of doing in a movie this size. You know, there's no safety net with him. Ocean's 13, compared to 11 and 12, is a lot more musical and a lot more performed music. We worked a lot on actual sort of chord structures and the parts, and then on many occasions had several musicians playing together. The whole thing feels like a lot more of a performance, where 11 and 12 is a lot more cut up and a lot more programming. So this has much more of a live kind of feel. And it's a lot more quirky as well at the same time. It's almost as if like it's the best of 11 and 12 all in together, but with this full kind of performance. I think it's definitely the most musical score out of all three. I've got a lot of vinyl. I still buy it frequently. I still think nothing sounds like it. I think CDs are just the biggest scam that was ever put on this earth. I just feel when you get a piece of vinyl, you feel like you've got something, you know, you can smell it. It's, you know, it's the right size. It's like, you know, you can read the sleeve notes without squinting. And it just sounds better, and it lasts longer as well. A lot of these records, I think, in many ways were really far ahead of their time. And they're great sources of entertainment and first and foremost, inspiration. I get a lot of inspiration from a lot of records that you just couldn't, you wouldn't dare like sort of put on in the house. You know, sit in with the wife, let me just pop this on, you know? Like I'm more fascinated with, you know, the sound and the sort of sonic sensibility that a lot of these records have. I think if I knew how many records I had, I'd be pretty sad. And wouldn't, you know what I mean? It's kind of, I've got so many, it's like people say, oh, I've got 15,000 records, and go, how do you know that? I mean, how do you, do you count them? I've got too many records actually. I think I've got enough records to actually start up a business on eBay and just sell them all. But I just hold on to things, and it's so handy for working on films. Because I don't just collect, I've been collecting music since I was a kid. You know, from Northern Soul, 60s Soul, rhythm and blues, jazz, punk rock, a lot of post-punk, disco, house music, acid, psych, soundtracks, you know, weird experimental records, musique concrète, which is this French genre that was based around sampling natural sound and manipulating it, morphing it into other sounds. A lot of the records that I buy at the minute are pretty rare records. I've got different people that I buy records from, like record dealers who their job is to actually go out and find these obscure pieces for probably, you know, €1 a pop, and then sell them to you for many, many, many more euros. Carl Stalling was a very unique individual. You know, a lot of his music still sounds really current today. I mean, it's incredible, especially with a lot of current electronic music. I mean, in many ways, it sounds still fresher and better than a lot of things. Tony Schwartz, who was a recording artist on Folkways Records. His father was a great friend of Einstein, and they were having dinner one night, and he went up to Einstein and went, I'm going to start a record label, and I'm going to record every single sound there is in the world. And Einstein said, that's a very good idea. And he did. He started Folkways Records, which is an incredible record label. And Tony Schwartz was an artist on that. He would record things like New York taxi conversations and just record people on the streets and like sort of just animal sounds and just lots of bizarre like scenarios, like, you know, 3 a.m. downtown New York, you know, just people on the streets. And people like Raymond Scott, who did a lot of the Looney Tunes music, who was also an inventor of synthesizers and did this incredible series called Soothing Sounds for Babies. Pierre Henry, who was one of the creators of, you know, musique concrète, Pierre Schaeffer, he did lots of just mad, sort of quirky, sort of electronic music. A lot of great French composers, actually, people like Guy Pedersen, you know, the list goes on and on. You know, I know more about that kind of music than I do about popular music. But it's an amazing source of inspiration.